Well, it's good to have all of you with us today. And I just want to give a warm shout out to everyone watching online across all of our campuses. And this entire week, I have been so excited just to get to this weekend. I mean, this weekend across all of our campuses is just one of those weekends where we're kicking off a new series. I'll get to that in a moment. We have our Connect group event after every service across all of our campuses. So excited about that. And if you are on Facebook, you might have saw a post on Wednesday where we said, hey, special announcement this weekend you don't want to miss. And so if you saw that, maybe you were wondering what that was, and maybe if you didn't see it, hey, surprise, we have a special announcement. And so are you excited to hear our special announcement? Like, yeah? I mean, this is like pre-excitement. You're like, why am I clapping? I don't know what it is. Maybe I won't find it exciting. Let me tell you, you're going to find it exciting. I think about the last 14 months. And there's been moments over the last about 14 months where we just kind of framed it as, these only God moments, right? It's just only God, only God, only God. And oh, by the way, that's been the story of Tri-County Church for the last 20 plus years. Just moment after moment after moment of just only God. You can only explain it that way. It's like, only God. Back in around April, we had a group of people that approached us, and they were at a church that was just really, really struggling. And they approached us and said, hey, we just think if we could come together that our two churches together, we're just better together. And so they just, with open hands, just said, will you come and just merge with us? We want to become a Tri-County church. And for most people, that's an unheard of storyline. And it really is across the country. Most churches would rather just die and close their doors than to actually merge with another church. But what we're seeing around the country is more and more churches who really have a passion, a commitment to reach their local community, to reach people for Jesus. They're coming with just humility, with their hands open, saying, hey, we would rather be part of your church than to close our doors. And this is for this group of people. They said, hey, we want to reach our friends, our neighbors, our family in the Grampian area. Will you partner with us? We want to be a Tri-County church. And so over several months, we had a lot of conversations. We saw God working in incredible ways. And in August, we launched our 4th Tri-County campus, TCC Grampian. In the last 6 months, I mean, just story after story after story of life change is happening in Grampian. Why? Because a group of people just said, hey, we're better together. In September of 2017, last year, we launched our online campus. And people still go, well, but is it a real campus? I'm like, yeah, no, it's a real campus. Every weekend, we have new people taking a first step into church or back into a church. Every weekend on our online campus. They're kind of putting their toes in and saying, I want to check this out. Some people can't get outside their home, and they're taking a step back into church. Why? Because we have church online now. We have people chatting right now. They're talking as I'm talking, by the way, which is high five. That's all. They're chatting. We have private prayer rooms. We launched our first life group a couple weeks ago, about ready to launch our second online life group. People around the world connecting, doing life together. It was our 5th campus. Well, this story actually starts about a year and a half ago. I was just a name on a candidate list for Tri-County Church. The leadership team was looking to see who God was going to lead Tri-County Church. I was a name on the list. I was standing in a kitchen having a conversation. We were cooking eggs, but let me describe the eggs we were cooking. The egg to meat ratio was way out of whack in the positive way. It was like 1 egg to like 12 pounds of meat. It was amazing. And so we're cooking these meat omelets, and I started having a live conversation with someone who was talking about legacy and talking about what's coming next. And again, I was just a list of names for Tri-County Church. And I said, you know what? There's churches like Tri-County. And just maybe that's part of your story, is that your church becomes part of a church like Tri-County, because churches like Tri-County want to partner with churches and say, hey, we're better together. And I think about that one conversation in that one kitchen, having no clue where God was going to take me, because be honest, at that point, I mean, I was begging God not to move me to Du Bois, right? Like you beg God, by the way. I mean, I know some of you are like, oh, no, it's true, right? And I'm like, God, not there. And as we had that conversation, no clue what God was going to do within our lives. And now we look back and only God. Because this church, this area has quickly become family to my family. Last year we started conversations. It's been about a year in the making of really having conversations with the leadership from this church, with our leadership from Tri-County Church, to say, hey, what would it look like if we merged? What would it look like if your church became part of Tri-County Church? And through so many life-giving, only God conversations, it is my honor on behalf of the leadership team here at Tri-County Church to let you know we are launching campus number 6. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And this is where it's going to be. That person that I was standing with eating those meat omelets was my father-in-law. And I just have to say, not many son-in-laws have a relationship like I do with my father-in-law. And what Jim understood was his season of ministry was coming to a close. What the leadership of Mill Hall Church of Christ understood was that they had to do something to reach people, and that they weren't willing just to close their doors like so many churches do. Some 15,000 churches a year just close their doors. They just throw in the towel. And what the leadership from Mill Hall Church of Christ understood is they weren't going to throw in the towel. They weren't going to give up. They weren't just going to succumb to the pressures of just, we can't do it. And what they realized is that they were better together. And so right now we're actively, we have a plan. More and more of it will be shared in the weeks to come. But we are in the stages of installing some equipment and getting leadership in place. And we will be having Easter services there as TCC North Central. And it's just one more step. Again, when we think about being the light in every local community we can, we're just stepping through doors that God's opening. I mean, right? These are the only God moments. Well, if you're a guest with us, thanks for coming. I mean, what an exciting weekend for you to be a part of. And we're launching this brand new series titled ISO, In Search Of. And we're connected, but yet alone. And we think about that. I mean, since the dawn of time, us as human beings, the number one way we connect with each other is through communication, right? We talk to each other. We have a conversation with each other. There's nothing new. We just understand. That's how we connect with people. And oh, by the way, when you look at the divorce rate around this country, around the world, one of the top 3 reasons people get divorced is communication. If not number 1, it's like tied for number 1, right? Because communication, it connects people, but communication can be extremely difficult. And for the vast majority of humanity, over thousands and thousands of years, talking with people was the pathway, was the method to communicate with people. But somewhere around 3500 BC, the Sumerians started to develop this ability to take words and to start writing it down. It's called cuneiform writing. And by 3200 BC, they had really started to master this idea of taking pictures and attaching them to words. Well, by 1500 BC, all of a sudden, an alphabet, a script alphabet, started to come out of this kind of cuneiform type of writing. And there was only 22 letters, but they started realizing that there's some sounds that they could develop a script around. Well, we bounce into around 600, 700 BC, and there's just writings in history around kings that would always have two scribes. One scribe to write in cuneiform writing and another scribe to write in this alphabet script writing, because they were still bouncing between both realities. And by 100 BC, cuneiform writing had just disappeared, and now it's just this script type of writing. And as the script type of writing emerged, so did the technology around how to write words onto some type of material. And now people could write letters and send letters to people. I mean, we call it mail, right? But mail's been around a long time. They just call it different things. I think about when I was growing up. I mean, long distance cost a lot growing up. And so we would hand write letters. And it was a great process, except for me, because my handwriting is atrocious. And so I would hand, my mom was like, oh, no one can read that. I'm like, Mom, like now as an adult, no one can read my handwriting. And now my youngest daughter has received from me that great gift of no one able to read her handwriting. So every year with a new set of teachers, guess what my wife and I now do? We're like, hey, by the way, no matter what you do, Claire got her dad's handwriting. Good luck, right? It's just, we just embrace that fact. But you would handwrite letters, and then you would lick a stamp. Remember when you actually licked a stamp? Oh, that taste was incredible. And then you would lick the envelope, and every time I'd go to lick an envelope, I had this thought, I'm like, okay, I hope I don't get a paper cut on my tongue. And then you would send a letter, and then you would wait for the response. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell was the first one. It was actually March 10th of 1876. Was the first one to talk to his trusty assistant, Mr. Watson, on a phone. And the first thing ever to be said on a phone was, Mr. Watson, come here. I need to see you. You think about that moment, right? It's this historic moment, and those were the first words ever to be said on a phone. I grew up, and we had one phone in our house. It was in the kitchen, and it was tethered to a wall with a cord. And all of a sudden, one day, I went to grab the phone, and my parents had bought this 20-foot cord. And it was like, oh, this is amazing. Now you can call someone, walk around the corner into the living room, and have a semi-private conversation. And then there was that day when my mom and dad came home, and they had a box, and in that box was a phone. The phone was about this big, and, well, the antenna was about that long, right? It was a cordless phone. Now you could walk anywhere. You could have private conversations out on the deck. And it was just like technology. Now we're not tethered to a wall. We can go anywhere. In 1984, AT&T consolidated, and part of that consolidation, they were starting to take some of this technology and bring it into the consumer market so people could actually afford it. And so maybe you had one of these. I'm sure all of you had one of these at one point. It was a telephone answering machine, and that revolutionized communication, because now, when you called someone, it just didn't ring, 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 ring. Now it would ring 3 or 4 times, and all of a sudden you could leave a message. You wouldn't even have to talk to people anymore. Now you could just say, hey, this is what I need, or call me back, or see me this weekend, or whatever the message might be. Now you can leave messages for people, and that was significant. As technology increased, all of a sudden this thing that you clipped on your belt, called a pager, came in, where you could page people. But as quickly as a pager came in, it went out. Why? Because of mobile phone technology. And over the years, we've seen the mobile phone technology increase, and guess what? Our landlines decrease. I mean, how many of you, across all of our campuses online, how many of you do not, those are two key words, do not have a landline in your house anymore? Yeah, quite a few of you, quite a few. Some of you are like, can we do that? Yes, you can. You can. 5 years ago, my wife and I had this conversation. We're like, why are we paying for our landline? It was one of those interesting husband and wife conversations. I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure why we are paying for a landline. I don't even know what our landline number is. If someone asked me, hey, what's your home number? I'd be like, I don't know. Here's my cell number. And we've just seen that happen. But the same thing for mail. As technology has increased, our dependence on writing letters and stamps has decreased, especially with email. Because now, I mean, you just write down anything you want, hit send, and it instantaneously gets there. You don't have to wait for a reply. You don't have to wait for it to be mailed across country. It's just instantaneously. And we think about, for thousands of years, the only way to communicate was in person with our voices. And then all of a sudden, this whole writing idea came out. And now you could actually write a letter. And then 1876, the phone. I mean, that's new technology. When we look at the span of humankind, and now we're at this point where when we think about all the different ways we can communicate with people, I mean, it's just exponentially growing. I mean, there's moments where I read a message and I think to myself, what app did I read that message on? And now I have to flip through different apps to go, was that Slack? Was that email? If it's email, what account was that on? Or was it Facebook Messenger? Or was it, I mean, I have to now think about where I read that message from that person. And we as a society are exponentially more connected than we've ever been. But isolation is growing at the same speed. All the experts has phrased this whole idea as the loneliness epidemic. The loneliness epidemic. And loneliness epidemic isn't just tied to technology and how we communicate. But that's a significant part of it. I mean, part of it is the mobilization of our country around the world. People who used to work 30, 35 years in one job, now, I mean, it's now months, if not just a few years, people are staying at jobs. They're bouncing around in different jobs. Now people are moving from state to state to state or around the world more often. Why? Because it's a lot easier now to move with transportation. And all of that is feeding into this loneliness epidemic. But what they realize is how we communicate with each other is a significant component of our loneliness epidemic. In 1980, it said around 20% of all people, especially focused in the United States, were lonely, 20%. And in 30 years, that number has doubled to 40%. It's doubled. See, what we have to realize, I mean, we really have to grasp onto this reality that you can be connected, but completely isolated. That you can be known, but still all alone. And that's what we all have to realize. You can be surrounded with friends, but feel lonely. You can have hundreds, thousands of Facebook friends, Instagram friends, Snapchats, or whatever platform you want to lean into. You can have all of these people connected to you, but feel completely isolated. You can be the life of the party, but yet feel like no one really knows you. You could walk into a church, high five people, hug people, people smile at you, but still sit down and feel like, I'm completely alone. There's been a lot of study and research in this whole idea of the loneliness epidemic. And one of the leading researchers is a guy named John Cacioppo. He's a professor of psychology at the University of Chicago, and he's been studying this whole idea since the 1990s. And this is what he says. He says, denying you feel lonely makes no more sense than denying you feel hunger. And this is a massive insight that really it captivated my attention, because what he's found out is there's these things called aversive signals. Aversive signals are signals like you feel hungry, or you feel pain, or you feel thirsty, right? And there's just these normal human feelings, signals, that when you feel thirsty, what do? You get a drink. When you feel pain, what do? You identify what's causing the pain, and you remove it, right? You don't just sit there going, oh, I love this feeling of pain, right? And so there's these signals. And what John Cacioppo has discovered is that these aversive signals, like pain, thirst, hunger, there's another one. It's the feeling of being lonely. It's the same type of aversive signal. But yet there's a stigma wrapped around that, isn't there? And he hits on the stigma. He goes, yet the very word lonely carries a negative connotation, signaling social weakness or inability to stand on one's own. And think about that. Isn't that just so true? If you don't think it's true, try it after service. Walk into a restaurant. When you see a friend sitting at a table in a restaurant, walk up to them and say, hey, it's great to see you. Man, I am hungry and I feel lonely. And see what happens. Right? I mean, that would just be awkward. I mean, it's easy to say to someone, hey, man, I'm just thirsty. And they're like, hey, I got some water, right? That's easy. But if you walked up to a friend and like, yeah, you know what? It's been an interesting week. I just feel lonely. Watch what happens to the conversation. Whoosh. You see, loneliness, that feeling, is just like thirst, just like hunger, just like pain. But yet we separate it out and we treat it differently, but it's not. Well, John goes on and he ends with this thought. He says, the need to interact is deeply ingrained in our genetic code. I don't know John's faith journey. I don't know what he believes about the Bible or any of that. But he hits on something that's foundational throughout all the Bible, that we're wired for relationships with people. I mean, that's one of those threads throughout the whole Bible, that God designed us. God created us to be connected to each other. We are better together. And John's just highlighting, saying, in our genetic code, how we have been created. We've been created to interact, to be connected, to be known by other people. It's how we're created. Well, there's a book in the Bible that's just going to get right into this whole idea. I mean, it's some almost 3,000 years before John Cacioppo made this statement. The book of the Bible is this big, long word. Maybe you've seen this before. Maybe you don't even know how to pronounce it. It's the book of Ecclesiastes. And isn't that, I mean, it's one of those words that I'm pretty sure none of you has ever said in just the normal rhythm of your life, right? It just doesn't. It's one of those church Bible book words. But here's the thing about this word Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, and follow me on this because I don't want to lose you, but the word Ecclesiastes is actually the Latin transliteration of the Greek translation of a Hebrew word. Follow that? Wow. Right? So it's a Latin transliteration of the Greek translation of this Hebrew word, and the Hebrew word is this word koheleth. And that word can be translated in several different ways, but in the book of Ecclesiastes, that Hebrew word, koheleth, is simply translated teacher. And you're thinking right now, like, well, why didn't they just use that word? So much easier than Ecclesiastes. But that's what the word means. King Solomon is the author of Ecclesiastes. He's the son of the famous Jewish king, King David. And King Solomon, if you're not familiar about King Solomon, he checks every one of those earthly boxes. When you think about that person that you know, that, I mean, from the outside, they just have it all. They've checked all of those boxes, and you look at their life and like, oh man, if my life could look like that. That was Solomon. I mean, he checked the wealth box. The wealth box. In the Bible, it tells us that out of his 39 years of being king, he got 25 tons of gold every year. I read this one article this week. It was in a secular article, and they had looked at the top 20 wealthiest people of all time. So they looked at their net wealth, they brought it into today's day and age and what that number was. And as I looked through the top 20 people, wealthiest people of all time, by the way, Bill Gates was number 19. And number 5 was Solomon. An estimated wealth of $2.2 trillion, right? He checks that box. Well, I had to at that point go, well, who's number 1, right? Who's the number 1 wealthiest person of all time? And by the way, when I got to number 1, it shocked me because I did not anticipate this person's name there. You know who was there? Genghis Khan, number 1. I mean, you think about Genghis Khan, right? When you think about him, I mean, this merciless leader, he killed, who knows the number of people? And it's kind of like, well, murderer and great businessman. High five, way to go, right? Like I did not expect his name at number 1. But Solomon was number 5, $2.2 trillion, estimated net worth. He checks the wealth box. He checks the power box. Underneath Solomon's reign as king, Israel grew to be a powerful, powerful nation. He checks the wisdom box. And Solomon's known as the wisest person to ever have lived. He checks the influence box. He had influence on all of these other nations. The Bible tells us that Solomon had 700 wives. And by the way, there's a huge downside to this whole idea of him having 700 wives, but that's for another day. But out of those 700 wives, which I don't know, did they all have name tags? How can you memorize all of those names, right? Anyway, for another day. But out of those 700 wives, many of those were princesses, daughters of other rulers and other kings, right? Because they did that to help create peace between nations. He had influence and he had incredible success. Solomon built the temple, God's holy dwelling. And when you read the description of what he built, it is filled with wealth and power and wisdom and influence. Solomon checked all of the boxes. So he starts off writing Ecclesiastes, and he starts off this whole idea with these great encouraging words: meaningless, meaningless. And that word can be translated, it's like vapor or breath, just wow. Says the teacher, and this word, it's the same Hebrew word as Ecclesiastes, same word. Utterly vapor. Everything is meaningless. And Solomon, who checks all the boxes, is looking out at life. And he's looking across his life, his kingdom, the people he leads, the other nations. He's just looking at life, and he says, everything is meaningless. He goes on and says, everything under the sun, everything on this earth, everything is meaningless. And then what Solomon does is he starts to investigate life. And that's the main majority of Ecclesiastes. He's investigating life. He's looking at different areas of life. And he's drawing some conclusions to the things he's looking at. He's applying some wisdom to his insights on life. But at the very, very end of Ecclesiastes, he brings everything to this one conclusion. And he says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, and including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. And he just says, hey, you're going to have to give an account to your life one day. One day you're going to be with God, and God's going to look at your entire life, and he's going to high-five you for the good things, and for the not-so-good things, he's going to be like, hey, what's up with that, right? Got to give an account. So you live your life fearing God and keeping his commandments. Now that word fear, we got to dial into that. If you watched our New Year's Eve weekend, week one of our countdown series, I actually drilled into this word fear, because when we read this modern Americanized word fear, we think of something completely different than when Solomon was writing this word some 3,000 years ago, right? When we think about fear, we think about, whatever you're scared of. Maybe you have that coach that you're fearful of. You have that teacher that scares you. You clowns or bunnies. You know what scares you, right? We all have things that we're scared of. And so when we read this word fear, you're like, really? Like, I should be scared of God? And that's not what Solomon was intending at all. You see, this word fear is a Hebrew word, yare. And here's the thing about the Hebrew alphabet. It started like the cuneiform writing. They were symbols, word pictures. And that's how the Hebrew language started. And then over time, it morphed from pictures that described an idea, a word, a thought, to actually a written alphabet. And so when Solomon would have written this, these were all three individual pictures that come together into this word yare, which we have translated into fear. You see, this first image is yod, and yod is this picture of a hand, meaning God's mighty strength, God's mighty power. This next symbol is a symbol of a head, and that letter, that picture is resh, and resh is all about God's authority, him as leader. And this last one is Aleph. And it's this picture of oneness or unity. You see, when Solomon wrote the word fear, yare, he's painting this beautiful picture about a relationship with God, a relationship where there's reverence, because God is all powerful, his mighty hand. Where we choose to submit to God as our leader out of reverence for God, because he's the holy, one true God. And that God desires for us to be in relationship, unity, oneness with God. You see, when Solomon wrote that word, it wasn't about you trembling in the corner. It's all about this picture of a relationship with God. And he just says, hey, the conclusion of the entire matter, when I look at life, when I've investigated life, hey, you got to fear God and keep his commandments. Follow the pathway that he has set for you. But in between, meaningless, and fear God and keep his commandments, again, Solomon gives us incredible insights into life. And some of his insights is about relationships that we have together. And so here's one of his relationships insights. He says, two are better than one, right? It's a direct statement. He's like, don't live your life in isolation. Don't live your life by yourself. Don't live your life alone. Don't live your life where you just have separated yourself from everyone. Why? Because two are better than one. Why? Because it's important, because guess what? He's going to develop a framework around why two are better than one. But here's the thing I want to caution all of you about. It's easy at this point to say, yeah, but. Yeah, I get that two are better than one, but Chris, if you knew my story. Yeah, I know two are better than one, but you know what? Man, my first marriage and what that person did to me. Yeah, I know two is better than one, but I had a bad church experience where bad people in church treated me this way. Like, two are better than one, yeah, but I had a best friend and they broke confidence with me. Yeah, two are better than one. I got into business with a guy that I grew up with, and do you know what he stole from me, from the company? Two are better than one, but. And I just want to encourage you for this series, just try to set all the reasons why to the side. Just try to. So Solomon is going to develop this framework around why two are better than one. He says two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. And this word labor is a very broad term. It's whatever you do. I mean, that could be your work, your business. That could be helping out, coaching a soccer team or a basketball team. That could be helping out with Boy Scouts with your kids. I mean, whatever you do, two is always better than one. One of our staff values here at Tri-County Church is it's one of the major values that we really push out. And this is this whole idea of collaboration. And we have the statement. Simply says, collaborate with campus staff and leaders, intentionally maximizing individual gifts and passions to create, innovate, and develop a thriving church. And we just live by it. And guess what? Collaboration can be messy. Why? Well, you got many different people with different perspectives. We got many different people that see things from different angles. We got many different people that believe maybe it should look this way, and other people think it should look that way. And that creates interesting conversation when people are pretty passionate and committed to their idea. But here's the thing we know. The two are better than one. That as we collaborate and circle around an idea, we just keep on circling around the idea until all of a sudden the light bulb goes off. And when that happens, it's amazing what happens with the team. The team just gets sucked in together like, that's it. It takes effort. It takes work. Sometimes it's extremely messy, especially when you have extremely passionate people voicing their ideas. And Solomon says, hey, two are better than one. No matter what you do, include other people with you. He goes on and he says, if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. And by the way, when I get to this point, but pity anyone, I don't know for you, but I get here and all I can hear in my head is Mr. T. Remember Mr. T? I pity the fool, right? Mr. T? So I get here and what I want to put in here is, but pity the fool. So you can read that way, by the way, in your head. Okay, but pity the fool who falls and has no one to help them up. This idea of falls down is both physically, like physically you're injured or health you're injured, like a physical issue with you, right? You need help. But then in the Hebrew, this idea of falling down can also be morally. If you morally fall down, if you have a moral issue, something you don't want to tell anyone. You're struggling. My wife has always phrased it this way. She says, who's your 2 a.m. friend? So that's a question for you. Who's your 2 a.m. friend? Before your marriage falls apart, who's that person you can call and say, hey, I need help because our marriage is headed down a pathway? Who's your 2 a.m. friend? Before your addiction decimates your job, your marriage, your relationship with your kids, with your friends, because that's what happens with addiction. Before it gets there, who do you call and say, there's something putting its talons into me. I can tell it's starting to control me. I need help. Who's that person that you call when you just don't know what to do with one of your kids? Instead of hiding the fact because you're embarrassed, you call that person and say, hey, I need wisdom, I need direction, I need help, I don't know what to do. Who's that person before you make a significant life decision that could alter the course of not just your life, your family's life, the person you're dating, whatever the relationship scenario you find yourself in? Who's that person that you can call right now, no matter the time, and share anything with? Who is that? Do you have a 2 a.m. friend? Do you have a 2 a.m. friend? Solomon goes on, and he writes, also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And we don't quite understand this. In our modern day and age, this might feel a little weird going, I don't know if I would just do that. But think about almost 3,000 years ago, you'd be traveling by foot. You would only carry your essentials, and you'd be sleeping overnight, especially when you're traveling a long distance. And so the person you're traveling with, like you would, share a covering, share a coat. Your body heat would keep you alive. And you think about that emotional connection with someone where you're willing to lay that close to them. You think about the vulnerability with that person. I mean, that's what Solomon's saying is, who is that person you can be that real with, that transparent with? Who is that? Two is better than one. Again, he's building this framework. And then he says, the one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. So you're traveling. You get attacked. Two is always better than one, right? The odds are in your favor. But then at this point, as he's building this framework around two is better than one, he almost just throws a curveball. Right? You're reading this and you're like, okay, that's good. Okay, I got to find one person. Maybe that's what you're thinking. Okay, I just need one. Okay, who's that one person? Who's that one person? Who's that one person? And then all of a sudden, he throws this curveball and he says, but a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And here's the thing. 3 doesn't mean 3. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I need to find one person, now I have to find 2 people, I can do that. It's not what 3 means. So look at this picture. Right? 2 is better than 1. And Solomon's like, hey, this is true. Like, don't live your life isolated. Don't live your life alone. Find someone to do life with. But at the very end, he's like, I tricked you. A cord of 3 strands. That number 3 doesn't really have anything to do with a number. It has everything to do with this idea of completeness. That you need more than just one person. That you should have a circle of people that you're connected to. That you need people in your life. Why? Because we are better together. It's not about a number. It's about having the right people connected with you. Because we all are better together. Last Tuesday, a group of us from the leadership team of Tri-County Church made our way the hour and 10-minute drive over on I-80 to Mill Hall, where we as a group of people, staff, leadership team, spent the evening with staff and the leadership of our new Tri-County Church North Central. We ate incredible desserts that were no sugar, no fat, no calories. They were amazing. We took people around to show them the church, the facility. But before we started the evening, we got into a circle. And this is just one of the images from the night. And I'm standing there next to my father-in-law. And around the circle, we saw 2 different churches just come together. There's tears, because there's a lot. Tears of excitement, tears of joy, tears of letting go, tears of unknown, like, right? That's real emotion. And there was a whole bunch of laughter. There was one moment in the night towards the end. I walked up and I grabbed a chair next to Joel, and Joel is one of our communicators here. He's also the president of our leadership team, and he's just a good friend of mine. And I sat next to Joel, and we both just, it was almost like at the same, you know those conversations that just click at the same time? Like you could just tell, and we both looked at each other and just said, what just happened here? 2 different churches in one evening just coming together. This is just something only God. As we looked around this whole entire space, as just people from both churches are now just sitting next to each other, talking, getting to know each other, laughing, finding connection points. It was just something that is so difficult to describe. But what we realized, everyone around this circle, what we realized, that we are better together. You got to know, you can be isolated, or you can be connected, but yet still completely isolated. You can be known, but still all alone. And in this series, we just want to help you to take a step around whatever island you've created for yourself and take a step out to really embrace, not just to say the words "we're better together," but live out "we are better together." Well, a few moments ago, I said this one entire thought about, don't just say "but." Just don't say "but." Like, set those thoughts to the side. And along this series, just maybe, some of those thoughts of why you just want to create this barrier around you, just maybe that might dissipate a little bit. And so as we get ready to step into next week's message, because this is where we're headed, this is something I just want to share with all of you. Every person, that includes you, to ever live, that includes you, has at least one reason why living a life isolated and alone is better than living life together. We all have a story of why we would rather create an island and walls around us. All of us have at least one story, right? We have that one story, that person that broke trust. We have that one person that we shared something in confidence and they shared it with other people. We have that one story where we put ourselves all out thinking that they would help us and they didn't. We have that one story where, guess what? We expected them to show up in our time of need and they didn't show up, or worse yet, they did show up, but then they walked away. We all have a story. I'm just telling you. We all have those stories where when people have let us down, and the easy decision is to step onto our island and isolate ourselves and keep people at arm's length. But that's not together. That's not together. And all of us. And when I say all of us, that also means Jesus had people that let him down, and Jesus had people that weren't there for him, and Jesus had people that he thought maybe, just maybe, in his greatest time of need would show up. Instead, they hid. So everyone includes Jesus. But if you allow that reason or those reasons to keep you isolated, you will live the rest of your life by yourself, alone. And remember, that feeling, just like hunger, just like thirst, just like pain, we are better together. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for our time. Lord, I just pray that I pray for everyone who's watching, who's connecting with our online campus, across our campuses, because I know there's people that just really, they just know they're completely isolated. And maybe they want it that way. Maybe they thought they wanted it that way. Maybe feel like there's no other option. But Lord, I just pray that they know that you have designed us. It's part of our genetic code to truly have relationships with people. Even knowing that it might hurt us, even knowing that it might impact us, that, Lord, we truly are better together. In your name I pray. Amen.